Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. I thank Rabbi Strauss for this annual invitation to address the congregation on the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Of course, in a way, it's also a gift that I give back, because with all the sermons and other preparation that all the rabbis have on their plate during these holy days, today everyone's off. I'm giving the sermon. So it's my pleasure. Is there any day anywhere with the power and the sweep of Yom Kippur? A day of fasting, of spending so many long hours in the shul, a day of turning countless pages, a day of wondering, why am I here? The things people say to me can sometimes leave me wondering if we all really do know why. I still remember the man who told me once at the beautiful breakfast we went to later that night that Yom Kippur had been the best ever for him. Naturally, as his rabbi, I was delighted. I said, really? And he says, yeah, I just started Weight Watchers last week. And not eating for a whole day, boy, that's going to give me a couple of extra pounds to lose on the scale next weigh-in. Well, what's really going on here? I think sometimes many of us don't know. We recite the Ashamnu Bagadnu, the Al Chet Shechatanu, the Avinu Malkeinu, and we often think, I'm sure, that somehow these prayers are talking about other people, not us. But what really is at issue is the reality so beautifully captured in the coy title of comedian Elaine Boozler's best-selling book, Naked Beneath My Clothes. What a great name. That's us. That's what we are. And that's the side of us underneath our beautiful clothes, beneath the surface of our skin, that we are pushed to explore on Yom Kippur. Today is Shabbat Shuvah, the Sabbath of repentance, the day on which we are told to begin focusing our hearts in order to be ready for Yom Kippur Sunday night and Monday. And this morning I want to suggest that we begin this process by admitting something about ourselves, namely, that happy and fulfilled as we may be in some ways, in many ways perhaps, all of us have little things going on inside us, little hurts and pains and uncertainties, sometimes even pent-up anger. And some of these hurts are because of soured relationships with others. Perhaps people with whom we were once close. And still others are the hurts that come with disappointments with ourselves, with something unpleasant or unkind that we did, or worse, something we should have done but didn't, an email we sent that we wish we could have gotten back. Yom Kippur is, by its very name and nature, that day for seeking forgiveness and asking amends from those we have hurt, and at the same time an occasion for opening our hearts and swallowing hard as others extend their hand in friendship to us. On Yom Kippur, the question before us is, how strong are we? How able are we to bridge those obstacles to happiness and well-being, which have made the year just ended incomplete, and have left some of us at the start of this new year still living with a certain tension and pain. On this Shabbat Shuvah, we must first begin the process of reconciliation with others. I'm sorry are unquestionably two of the hardest words in the English language. It's very hard to forgive someone's error or insult or oversight or hurtful mistake. We may be able to rationalize why we were the only member of the family who didn't get an invitation to Aunt Claire's luncheon. And yet it's hard for us to ask ourselves sometimes over and over and over, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, why was I excluded? We're here to say openly and frankly as well that I have hurt someone. I have lied or cheated or caused some kind of estrangement within my family. I passed along a rumor that really I shouldn't have. And I've come here today on Yom Kippur to say that I'm sorry to those that I offended and give forgiveness to those who have injured me. But not just in my own head am I prepared to say these things, but I must be prepared to say them with full throat and voice. It's the theme of our Yom Kippur liturgy, the principal idea behind the Al Chait and the Ashamnu and all the prayers, to seek God's forgiveness, but as our tradition teaches, to seek the forgiveness of those we have harmed. The story is told of two feuding congregants who had a long-standing hatred for each other over an ancient wrong. The rabbi, after great difficulty, finally succeeded in bringing these two guys together for reconciliation. And one man extended his hand and said to his opponent, "For the new year, I wish you everything that you wish me." And the second one responded, "Aha, there you go again." Or as one writer put it, there's no revenge as complete as forgiveness. The question is, how do you forgive someone who has wronged you, maligned you, cheated you? Forgiveness is not easy, requires a formula, a process, which the rabbis gave us centuries ago. According to the rabbis, the first thing is the Shuvah must be genuine. It must be from the heart. There can be no forgiveness for someone who is a hypocrite, who shows no remorse, just wanting to get it over with, will say whatever needs to be said. Second, the apology must be verbalized, must be voluntary, and most of all, sincere. And third, there has to be a resolve by the offender to turn over a new leaf and to adopt a new pattern of behavior, to pledge, I'm never going to do that kind of thing again. There really is no alternative, for if we perpetuate an eye for an eye mentality, we will all end up blind. A number of years ago, while living in Israel, I was curious about the presence of two store owners catty-corner to each other on the same small street. And both stores curiously bore the same last name, and if you went into each store, they sold more or less the same stuff. So upon inquiring, I discovered that they were indeed brothers and had originally been partners in an old family business, working together with their dad for many years. Then the two brothers had some kind of a serious falling out. They split up, and instead of making peace with one another, trying to bring the family back together, they went into competition with each other by dividing that one store into two stores with separate entrances right next to each other, each one trying to kill off the other. Now, surely we can agree that this is not a particularly honorable or right way to live, but neither one could forgive the other. And so their lives were filled with pain and anger that lasted for years. We must be prepared to forgive when wronged, and if we want others to come to us, we must be prepared to accept their forgiveness. But there's more to Yom Kippur than seeking forgiveness and forgiving others. We must begin in looking inward and forgiving ourselves. It's hard to admit sometimes that we're wrong. I once saw a bumper sticker that read, "The man who can smile when things are going badly has just thought of somebody to blame." We often think we have to justify every mistake, defuse every criticism. We may feel that if we ever admit that we are wrong, we'd be less than perfect and people wouldn't love us as they do. As a result, we often become stubborn and defensive, always insisting that the problem is someone else's fault. And what is so lovable about that? On Yom Kippur, we admit that we have at times been weak and superficial and selfish and confused about what is really important. We admit to God that we are not perfect, but it's very hard for us to admit that to the people we know and love. One of my most appreciated parts of our service here on Shabbat morning, many Shabbat mornings here at Beth Yeshurun and at other synagogues, is when we invite the parents of the bar bat mitzvah to come and deliver a parent's prayer. Now, most of those prayers are beautiful. They're heartfelt. They speak about the hopes and aspirations they have as parents for their children. It's a lovely, poignant moment in the service. But sometimes I question a little bit what exactly is being said. For example, when a parent stands before his son or daughter and says, "I am in awe of you," that may be a little much. This is still a 13-year-old child, and you are still the parent. The child should be in awe of you, hopefully. And there are so many other things that are at times said in front of the ark. How you excel in everything you do. You are the best player on all the teams on which you play. You are the superstar of high school football. Parents sometimes, I think, get a little overwhelmed with the experience and perhaps say things that will cause maybe some problems in the future. University professors and academicians often say that the last generations of students who have come to all the major universities have a difficult time dealing with poor grades, who feel that because they have been so celebrated in their years at home for being perfect in all their scores, perfect in all their endeavors, that they struggle to handle getting a B. They struggle not being able to get all A's or making the top position on the team on which they seek to play. They've been conditioned to believe that they are perfect. And when you believe that you are perfect, you face a lot of stumbling blocks as you go through life. You can face them when you get out of college and go to a job, and you meet in an office and share ideas, but your idea is not the one accepted. For a person who's used to having everything he or she says held up for applause, it can be a very difficult and challenging time. And so we have to be able to say to ourselves and to our children that you are wonderful and we are wonderful, but there are times we are wrong. And there are times when we have to accept that it's okay at times to be wrong, at times to make a mistake, at times to be imperfect. God did not create us to be perfect. That's why God gave us the Torah. He didn't make us the Torah to do everything the Torah says. He gave us the Torah because it helps us be better. That's what parents should do for their children, help them be better, stronger. And that's what we have to be for ourselves, people who accept that to be perfect is not something that is possible for us as human beings. We must forgive ourselves and ask God to accept us for who we are. And finally, on this Day of Atonement, we must also forgive God. Yes, God, for letting us down, for allowing painful things to happen in our lives, for creating a world in which injustices abound. Not too many years ago, at the funeral of one of my most beautiful professors at seminary, a gentle and sweet colleague, I heard this beautiful eulogy that was delivered in his memory. And it included this sentence: "We don't know why God took Professor Sandmel from us, but we do know that as long as we walk these halls and deliberate in this institution, he won't be too far from us." Now, I know these words were meant to comfort a shocked and bereaved family and to provide some solace for the thousands of students and disciples like me who had, in the course of 35 years, studied with one of the greats in Judaic scholarship. But I must confess that for me, at least, reading and rereading these words, there was no solace. We don't know why God took Professor Sandmel from us. These words troubled me more than they consoled me. They seem to say that God willed the tragic cancer that claimed Sandmel's life, that it was God's doing and God's purpose that this career of an extraordinary, brilliant mind abruptly and prematurely was terminated. I find it hard to believe that God willed Mrs. Sandmel to be a widow, or their children to be orphans, or 65,000 homes in South Florida to be destroyed, or millions of children to starve in Africa. I find it terribly difficult to reconcile a God of mercy and love with a God who took Professor Sandmel from us. I know it is comforting to believe in times of great misfortune that the event that brings us sorrow is somehow the will of God. But the cost of such comfort is extravagantly high. It affirms God's omnipotence at the expense of his benevolence. It extols his power, but diminishes his compassion. A mature faith in God, I believe, is one that recognizes that we live in a world that God created with all its causes and effects, the so-called laws of nature. And the laws of nature teach that if a jet is in the air and a mechanic on the ground somehow did not apply a screw correctly, that the plane can no longer fly, that it will crash. Because that's what gravity does. It keeps everything in place, sometimes to our detriment, but overwhelmingly to our benefit. If somebody shoots a gun, it could be innocently or malevolently. But if somebody else just happens to be walking by and gets shot by that gun, he will be shot. That's the laws of nature. You pull a trigger, the gun's going to shoot. Did God cause the gun to be shot? No. The man who pulled the trigger did. But what happened afterward is simply the law of nature. The laws of nature that make our whole universe predictable. They enable us to celebrate winter in the winter, and not the next year, suddenly winter comes in June. Or a crop field that is growing broccoli, but next year somehow turns up growing oats. If the whole universe was simply unpredictable, we would not be able to function as human beings. It's part of the world, part of life that God created, which enables us to enjoy great benefits, but also some pain. Where is then God in this terrible loss, whether it's of Professor Sandmel or our own family members? God is in the love that Professor Sandmel felt for his family. God was in the outpouring of grief that thousands of his admirers felt for all he had done for them. God was in the tears which were shed, the caring that was expressed, the sense of impoverishment, of having lost somebody so special. God is always with us in the tragedies that befall us because we are frail and fragile creatures whose lives hang by a slender thread, and that we do not know how soon it will be too late to do all we were meant to do on this earth. God is in the power of the human spirit to rise above tragedy and pain, to somehow go on after sorrow, and even to transform suffering into song and pain into poetry. And God is in the great gift of memory that enables us to keep our loved ones alive and to take them with us as we journey in faith toward a brighter tomorrow. To pardon God is to complete the circle of forgiveness, which is at the heart of Yom Kippur. In Jerusalem, the southern gate to the old city, the one closest to the western wall, was for centuries known as the Sha'ar HaAshpot, the dung gate, or the gate of dirt, of garbage. And the usual explanation for this crazy name for such a holy place is that when the old city was in Turkish or Arab hands, garbage would be dumped there to make it harder for Jews who wanted to go to the Western Wall. But among the legends of Old Jerusalem is another explanation, and it's one I like better. It teaches that Jewish pilgrims would come to Jerusalem from all over the world to pray at the wall. They would come on foot across the desert, and by the time they reached the gates of the city, their feet would be covered with mud and dirt. They didn't want to defile the Temple Mount by entering the city in that condition, so they would wash all the mud and filth off their feet at that southern gate, and then move forward to begin their prayers. We stand today at the gate leading to a new year. We too want to enter it clean. And so we ask Yom Kippur to cleanse us of all those old habits and resentments, the need for forgiveness, the need to be forgiven, the need to always be right, the need to feel perfect. and the hurt and anger we feel towards God for allowing us to feel pain. Only if we can now wash ourselves clean of those resentments, those expectations, those grudges, those fears, only then can we walk through the gate and claim the new year that awaits us. Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and Gemara Chatima Tova.